I walked into my apartment to find my mother crouched over a trash bin, feeding it what looked like a check, my lottery check. I'm Lena Hartley, and what they were burning was $2,500,000, 0 cents at least. That's what they thought. Flames danced over the paper as my father, standing beside her like a sentinel, looked me dead in the eyes and said, "If you won't share, you won't get a penny." And I laughed. Yes, really. I laughed so hard I cried, because in that moment, they thought they'd ruined me. They thought they were teaching me a lesson. What they didn't know, what they never knew, is that I had already cashed the real check, wired securely to a private account. What they torched was a photocopy, a souvenir, a joke. So, how did we get here? Why would parents go this far just because I refused to give my sister half of my lottery win? And more importantly, how did I go from being the forgotten child to the woman they tried to rob? Buckle up. This isn't just a story about money, it's about favoritism, betrayal, and finally, freedom. I grew up in a modest 2-story house tucked into a quiet suburb outside of Dayton, Ohio. From the outside, we looked like a picture perfect American family. My parents, my little sister Ruby, and me. But behind the neatly trimmed hedges and the Christmas card smiles, there were patterns I didn't understand until much later. When Ruby was born, I was 6 years old and already old enough to remember what life was like before her. I was the center of my parents' world, at least for a little while. They doted on me, celebrated my every drawing, and read bedtime stories, even on the nights they were tired. But as Ruby grew, their focus shifted and shifted back. I don't remember the change as a sharp break. It was more like a gradual fog rolling in. One day I was the big girl helping mommy with dinner. The next, I was just the girl who didn't need as much attention. "You're older, Lena," they'd say whenever I asked why Ruby got the new toys or why she didn't have to do chores. "You understand things better." I did understand, just not in the way they meant. I understood that Ruby's drawings were displayed proudly on the fridge while my straight A report cards were glanced at and stacked into a drawer. I understood that when Ruby wanted ballet lessons, we somehow found the money. But when I needed a graphing calculator for my AP math class, I had to babysit 3 weekends to afford it. I understood that when Ruby failed her driver's test, she got comfort and a second shot. When I failed mine, I got told I should have prepared better. Still, I loved her. She was my little sister. I helped her with homework, braided her hair for school dances, and covered for her when she snuck in late. She could be sweet, vulnerable, someone you wanted to protect. And somewhere deep down, I always hoped that being the responsible one, the steady one, would eventually earn me my parents' respect. After high school, I didn't take a gap year like some of my peers. I went straight to college on a partial scholarship and worked 2 jobs to cover the rest. Meanwhile, Ruby bounced between 3 different majors and eventually dropped out to find her passion. My parents paid her rent, helped her buy a used car, and never once pushed her to get a job. At first, I rationalized it. Maybe she needed more time. Maybe they were just trying to be supportive. But the truth gnawed at me. I was being punished for my independence, while Ruby was rewarded for her chaos. I graduated with honors and debt. My parents came to the ceremony but left right after, saying they had to get back early for Ruby's art show. They missed the celebratory dinner my roommate had organized. I still remember sitting in that restaurant, staring at the empty chair that was supposed to hold my mother. Despite everything, I kept showing up: Sunday dinners, birthday gifts, emergency phone calls when Ruby needed help moving apartments. I told myself family meant effort. Family meant forgiveness. But I was wrong. Family meant balance, reciprocity, love given and received, not just extracted. And I I didn't see that until the day they asked me to trade in my dreams for Ruby's next business venture. But that part comes later. For now, just know this. I loved them. I tried. And I lost so much of myself trying to prove I was just as worthy. There was one summer just before my senior year when Ruby totaled the family car while texting. No one was hurt, thank God, but I'll never forget how my parents reacted. My dad quietly arranged a replacement the next week, barely mentioning the cost. And when I asked if I could borrow it for college visits, I was told it's best if Ruby has it for her job search, a job search that never really happened. In contrast, when I needed a few $100s to enroll in a certification course that would have strengthened my resume, I was told to try applying for another scholarship or check if your job will reimburse it. They weren't cruel. They never said no outright, but they made sure the path was just a little harder for me. I used to think that's what being the older sibling meant, being the backup plan, the cushion, the one who could take the hit. But that thinking chipped away at me slowly. You don't realize you're bleeding until you've lost too much to stand. It wasn't all bad. There were slivers of warmth, Thanksgiving games of Scrabble, late night movies with popcorn, the occasional, we're proud of you, that felt like rain in a desert. But the imbalance, the invisible ledger that always favored Ruby, was real. And it planted the seed of doubt in me early. If I wanted love, I had to earn it. If I wanted to be seen, I had to overachieve. And maybe, just maybe, if something truly spectacular happened to me, they'd finally look at me the way they looked at her. If I didn't know then that even winning the lottery wouldn't change that, but I was about to find out. The signs weren't always loud. Most of the time they came wrapped in politeness or practicality, easy to overlook if you weren't the one collecting them. But I was. And once I started paying attention, I couldn't unsee it. Take birthdays, for example. Ruby's were full-scale productions. There were themed parties, homemade cakes in the shape of her favorite cartoon characters, hand-cut decorations. One year, she had a sleepover with a magician and custom goodie bags for every guest. My birthdays, a grocery store cake and a card signed, "Love, Mom and Dad." No party, no photos. When I turned 21, I bought my own bottle of wine and toasted myself in a dorm room while Ruby posted selfies from the tropical cruise our parents took her on for her 18th. She didn't even like cruises. She got seasick. Then there were the conversations. I'd come home from college and be met with a distracted, "Hey, how's school?" Meanwhile, Ruby could spend an hour describing a new hair color, and my parents hung on to every word. When I landed a competitive internship my junior year, I told them over dinner, heart pounding, expecting pride. My dad nodded, not looking up from his plate. My mom asked if Ruby could borrow my car that weekend. It wasn't just them ignoring me, it was them making it clear who mattered more. When Ruby's online boutique started, my parents threw her a launch party. They spent days decorating the backyard with fairy lights and printed banners. My mom wore a boho dress from the collection. My dad grilled and passed out wine like a proud investor. The business barely lasted 6 months, but you'd think she was launching the next Amazon. When I got a promotion at work after 3 years of grinding and picking up slack, there wasn't even a phone call. I texted the family group chat. No response. Money was always part of it too. Ruby never lacked. When her laptop died during finals week, a brand new one arrived the next day. When I needed car repairs, I rode the bus for 3 weeks until I saved enough. Even at family gatherings, the imbalance showed. My mom would ask Ruby to bring her famous store-bought brownies, while I was expected to help set up, cook, and clean. If I protested, I was being difficult. Ruby made mistakes, big ones. She once overdrew her account by $900 0 cents after buying boutique inventory she couldn't sell. My parents covered it immediately and framed it as a learning experience. When I missed a rent payment once during a rough month post-college, they told me I needed to learn to budget like an adult. I learned all right. I learned to stop asking. I learned to solve my own problems. And I learned that no matter how much I did right, it would never compete with the drama and chaos they seemed addicted to. The older I got, the sharper the lines became. Ruby was the baby, the dreamer, the fragile one. I was the responsible one, the one they never had to worry about. And because they didn't worry about me, they didn't think about me. It became harder to deny, harder to rationalize. Every family dinner, every voicemail, every "can you just help your sister this once" carved a little deeper into that old wound. And then came the day I overheard my mom on the phone with a family friend. I was in the hallway out of sight when she said, "Ruby has always had that special spark. Lena's reliable, of course, but Ruby's the one who could really shine with the right break." I stood there, frozen, reliable. The word hit me like a slap. That was all I was to them, a fallback, a safety net. Never the star, never the one worth celebrating. It didn't matter what I achieved. In their eyes, I was sturdy and safe, while Ruby was precious and full of potential. That moment didn't break me, not yet, but it lodged itself deep, like a splinter I couldn't remove, and it made one thing heartbreakingly clear. If anything big ever did happen in my life, they'd still find a way to make it about her. It started with a lottery ticket, an impulse purchase on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. I had stopped to put $20 in my gas tank and decided, almost without thinking, to buy a scratch off and a Powerball. I wasn't feeling lucky. I wasn't feeling much of anything. It had just been a long day. I forgot about the ticket until that night when I was reheating leftover stir fry and scrolling through my phone. I heard the numbers being read in the background from the small TV on my kitchen counter and almost didn't check. Almost. The first number matched. Then the second, my fork paused midair. By the sixth number, I wasn't breathing. I triple checked, then checked again. I took a photo of the ticket, tucked it into an envelope, and drove straight to my best friend Mariah's apartment. She opened the door and took one look at my face. What happened? I handed her the ticket and read the numbers aloud. We stared at each other in stunned silence and then screamed. After the disbelief settled, we did what any two practical women would do. We Googled everything: how to claim it, when to claim it, what to do first. I followed the protocol exactly, secured the ticket in a fireproof box, booked an appointment with the state lottery office, chose the lump sum payout, declined to go public. Mariah helped me find a lawyer and a financial advisor. Everything was going smoothly. I hadn't even told my family yet. I wanted the money to be secured, the plan in place. But a week later, sitting at our monthly Sunday dinner, I decided to tell them. Part of me still wanted their pride, their recognition. I thought maybe, just maybe, this would be the moment they finally saw me. We were finishing dessert when I said it. I won the lottery. Silence, then chaos. My dad demanded to know the amount. My mom gasped and grabbed my hand. Ruby, of course, squealed and hugged me like it was her win, too. I told them the number, 2.5 million. I explained that after taxes and the lump sum option, it would be about 1.4 million. I said I was already working with professionals, and then came the ask. "So," Ruby said, her voice light but unmistakably expectant, I guess this means I can finally pay off my business loan. I blinked. What? She grinned. You know, the $30,000, 0 cents I owe for the boutique, and maybe a little more to expand. I've got ideas, marketing plans, new suppliers. My father nodded. Yes, that seems fair. You're in a position to help. I opened my mouth, then closed it. I hadn't even gotten the money yet. I hadn't made a single purchase. I haven't made any decisions, I said carefully. I'm still working things out with my advisor. My mother frowned. Sure, but you're going to help your sister, right? I mean, it's family. I stared at them. No one had asked how I felt. No one had asked what I planned to do with my life now. They were already dividing it up. Something inside me twisted. I've got student loans, I said. I've worked since I was 16. I'd like to finally breathe for once. Of course, Ruby said quickly. But that's only fair if you help me too. We're sisters. I looked at her. Did you help me when I was drowning in rent? Or when I needed help moving apartments? Did you ever offer to pay me back for covering your phone bill that one month? She flushed, but my mother jumped in. That was different. You've always been more stable. This is Ruby's chance. There it was, again. Ruby's chance. My windfall had instantly become her opportunity. My once-in-a-lifetime luck had somehow been drafted into her fifth reinvention. I'm not making any promises right now, I said, heart pounding. Please respect that. The dinner ended with tension so thick you could slice it. As I left, my father's parting words chilled me. Don't forget who raised you, Lena. I didn't sleep that night. Every word echoed through my mind. The entitlement, the assumption, the complete lack of curiosity about what I might want. Over the next few days, the pressure escalated. Texts from Ruby outlining her repayment plan, emails from my father with family budgeting suggestions, a call from my mother that began with, "We need to set up a meeting." It was relentless. I tried to stay calm. I reminded myself that I had done nothing wrong, but the guilt, old and familiar, crept in. Was I being selfish? Was I letting money turn me cold? Maria shut that down fast. Lena, they are trying to guilt trip you. You haven't even touched the money yet, and they're acting like it's theirs. She was right. Still, I agreed to meet them one more time. Just to talk. They came to my apartment, all smiles and false concern, but the moment I hesitated, refused to sign a paper agreeing to fund Ruby's business, they turned. You're letting money change you, my father snapped. No, I said quietly. I think it's revealing you. That was when my mother stood up and said, if you won't share, then you don't deserve it. A week later, I came home during lunch and found smoke in the air. They'd used the spare key, one I'd forgotten they had, to break in and burn the oversized lottery check I'd left on my coffee table. It wasn't real. It was ceremonial, but they didn't know that. They thought they were punishing me, teaching me a lesson. They didn't realize the lesson was already mine. I called a locksmith before I called anyone else. That was the day I stopped being their safety net and started being mine. For the first few days after the break-in, I was in a haze. It wasn't just the betrayal. It was the sheer audacity. My own parents had let themselves into my apartment, rummaged through my things, and set fire to something they thought was my only proof of fortune. All because I wouldn't give my sister a cut. I couldn't bring myself to sleep there that night. I packed a bag and went to Mariah's place. When she opened the door and saw me clutching a backpack and blinking back tears, she didn't ask questions. She just stepped aside and hugged me tight. You can stay as long as you need, she whispered. Her apartment became my sanctuary. I worked remotely from her couch. I cooked simple meals, took long walks, and ignored the flood of missed calls from my parents. Ruby texted me too, first angry, then apologetic, then manipulative. The last one read, "You're punishing me for something I didn't even do. I didn't burn the check, Lena. They did. Don't cut me off for their mistake." But it wasn't just the fire, it was everything. Every birthday forgotten, every sacrifice ignored, every time I was expected to do more because I could handle it. It was the fact that I hadn't even had time to process the biggest event of my life before they tried to take it from me. I cried more that week than I had in years, quietly, often in the shower or curled up in bed, not just from sadness, but grief. I was grieving the fantasy that maybe one day my family would see me, that maybe I was wrong all along and they did love me fairly, but now I knew I had proof. Mariah tried to cheer me up. "Let's make a list," she said one evening, setting down 2 glasses of wine. "Everything you've ever wanted to do, but couldn't because of money." Stared at the blank paper. "I don't know anymore," I whispered. Because the truth was, I hadn't let myself dream in a long time. My life had been built around endurance, not imagination, stability, not joy. But slowly, the list began to fill, not with extravagance, but with hope. Pay off my loans, take a solo trip, buy a house with a garden, invest in therapy, learn how to restore old furniture, wake up without worrying about rent, help someone who really needs it quietly, anonymously. Writing it out helped. For the first time, I could envision a life where I wasn't always the afterthought. One night, I found myself staring at an old family photo on my phone. Me, Ruby, and our parents at the county fair. I must have been 10. I looked happy. I remember that day. I'd won a stuffed bear at a ring toss game, and Mom had said she was proud of me. I stared at that photo and sobbed because even then, that joy had come in fragments. My therapist, someone Mariah helped me find, calls it ambiguous grief, mourning what never truly existed. I wasn't just mourning the loss of my family's trust. I was mourning the illusion I'd carried all my life, the illusion that if I just kept being good, dependable Lena, they'd finally love me the way I needed. That week of tears and truth changed me. I didn't bounce back. I rebuilt quietly, intentionally. I hired a lawyer. I changed my locks. I alerted my building. I even began searching for a new place to live, somewhere secure, somewhere unknown to them. And when the lottery commission called to confirm my transfer had gone through, I didn't feel euphoria. I felt peace, the kind that comes after fire when everything unnecessary has been burned away. But I wasn't done learning, and they weren't done trying. A few days later, my mother left a voicemail that cracked something inside me all over again. I just don't understand what we did that was so wrong, she said, her voice trembling. "We were just trying to make sure the money didn't ruin you. Ruby said she was scared for you too." Scared for me. It was laughable and tragic. They weren't scared for me. They were scared of not having access to what they thought I owed them. I didn't return the call. Instead, I went for a long walk, sat in a park with a notebook, and wrote a letter I would never send. A letter to myself at 12, at 16, at 22. A letter that said, "You didn't imagine it. It wasn't your fault. You tried so hard, and now it's okay to stop trying." That evening, I took one small step that changed everything. I turned my phone off for a whole weekend. No texts, no guilt, no justifications. I sat with myself, I breathed, and I began to heal. They had taken so much from me, but I still had my voice, my mind, my future, and I was finally ready to protect it. They expected me to crumble, to give in, to come crawling back with guilt and apologies. But what they didn't expect, what even I didn't fully expect, was that I would rise. Once I turned my phone back on Monday morning, I was ready. I blocked their numbers. I changed my email address. I left my apartment that afternoon for a secure rental across town. New lease, new locks, new life. No one in my family knew the address, and I planned to keep it that way. The first night in my new place, I stood in the middle of the empty living room and just breathed. No echoes of shouting, no tension in the air, no one waiting to guilt me. It was the silence of sovereignty. I belonged to no one but myself. With the funds secured in my new account, I met again with my financial advisor. Her eyes lit up when I told her about the break in and what had happened since. "You've done more than most people would in your position," she said. "You've made hard adult decisions. That takes grit." I didn't feel strong, but I was learning to act strong. I started with the basics, paid off my loans fully, every penny. The next day, I sat on the floor with the final statement in my hands and cried, this time from sheer relief. Then I invested wisely, diversely. I set up emergency funds, retirement funds, and a quiet little scholarship for first gen college students, just enough to cover one full ride a year. Anonymous, no plaques, no attention. Just hope delivered silently. Mariah was my witness through it all. We joked that she was my honorary CFO. "You're like a responsible fairy godmother," she teased as we clinked wine glasses. "But instead of pumpkin carriages, you build equity portfolios." The best part? For the first time in my adult life, I had time. Time to sleep in, time to walk without a destination, time to try things that weren't profitable but were nourishing. I enrolled in a furniture restoration course. I bought a vintage desk off Facebook Marketplace, stripped it down, sanded the corners, and gave it a new coat of warm walnut stain. When it was done, I ran my hand over the smooth surface and whispered, "I made this." It felt better than any check ever could. As the weeks passed, something unexpected happened. Peace. Not flashy, Instagrammable peace, but deep, interior quiet. My nervous system wasn't on high alert. I didn't jump every time my phone buzzed. I could sit still without the weight of unsaid expectations. And then one afternoon, an email arrived. It was from Ruby. "I'm not asking for anything," it began. "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry." I stared at it for a long time. She admitted her entitlement, the manipulation, the way she'd let her parents fight her battles for years. She talked about the cafe where she was now working. Manager, long hours, steady paycheck. "It's humbling," she wrote, "but it's mine, and I'm proud of that." I didn't reply right away. I let the words settle. Then a few days later, I wrote back, "I'm glad you're finding your own footing. I need more time before I can imagine reconnecting, but thank you for your message." And that was it. No drama, no guilt, just boundaries with kindness. As spring melted into summer, I realized I hadn't thought about the money in days. Not really. It was just there, like oxygen, quietly holding me up. The biggest shift wasn't financial, it was personal. I no longer defined myself through their approval. I didn't bend to be loved. I stood as I was, and that was enough. 1 year after the lottery changed my life, Mariah and I toasted again, this time on the back porch of the small, cozy house I bought in a quiet neighborhood. There was no gate, no marble floors, just me, a few potted herbs, and a wind chime that sang softly with every breeze. To surviving, she said, raising her glass. To becoming, I answered. And as the sun dipped low, I knew this truth. The real fortune wasn't the money. It was me. That fall, I launched something I never expected, my own small business. A combination workshop and creative studio where I restored antique furniture and taught weekend classes to other women who wanted to learn basic skills in woodwork, budgeting, and self-repair. We called it Found and Finished, a nod to the forgotten pieces we salvaged and the lives we quietly rebuilt. The studio became more than a workspace. It was a sanctuary, a place where women from all walks of life came to hammer, laugh, and share stories. No judgment, no expectations, just community. It was there, during one rainy Saturday class, that I truly understood how far I had come. I watched as a middle-aged mother of 3 sanded down an old rocking chair with tears in her eyes. "This was my grandmother's," she whispered. "I thought it was trash, but now it's beautiful again." I squeezed her shoulder. "So are you." These small moments of quiet healing, of reclaimed worth, meant more than the zeros in my account. They were the reason I never regretted how things unfolded. When the next family message arrived, a formal invitation to Thanksgiving dinner, I didn't ignore it. I considered. I consulted my therapist. I gave myself the space to decide, not from guilt, but from groundedness. I sent a simple reply: "Thank you. I'm not ready this year, but I hope it's a good one." No explanations, no apologies. That, too, was growth. And maybe next year I would be ready. Or maybe I wouldn't. Either way, the choice would be mine. Always mine. Because I was no longer just surviving. I was leading my life with clarity, intention, and dignity. The money didn't save me. I saved me. I had only planned to drop by my old apartment for 15 minutes to grab a work file, but the moment I opened the door, I froze in shock. My parents stood in the middle of the living room, huddled over a metal trash bin. Flames flickered atop a large white sheet of paper, the commemorative copy of the lottery check. "What are you doing?" I shouted. My mother looked at me without a trace of remorse. "If you refuse to share, then don't expect to keep anything." My heart pounded in my chest. But then something unexpected happened. I started laughing. I laughed so hard I had to lean against a chair. My mother's face twisted in confusion. "What's so funny?" "What you just burned," I said between breaths, "was a souvenir. The real money was transferred electronically to a secured account with multi-factor authentication." Their expressions turned from smug to horrified. "You're lying," my father growled. I pulled out my phone and opened the email from the state lottery office, showing the official confirmation. "This says otherwise. That oversized check was only for media photos. The actual funds are protected beyond your reach." My mother staggered back, pale. My father clenched his fists. "We did this to help you come to your senses. Family is about sharing." "By breaking into my home and burning what you thought was my financial security," I replied coldly. "I've changed. I'm not the same girl you could guilt trip." Just then, Brooke walked in, holding takeout. She froze at the sight of me. I I just brought lunch for Mom and Dad." During a break-in, I glared. "Out, all of you. Now." I called a locksmith immediately. By nightfall, all the locks were changed. I also had my lawyer send a formal cease and desist letter, warning of legal consequences if they ever attempted to contact me or violate my privacy again. A week later, I received an email from my bank. The full lottery funds had been deposited. They had lost every manipulation, every threat, every desperate move. they failed. What they didn't expect was that I had prepared a lawyer, a private banker, a secure P.O. box, even offsite storage for documents. I had learned to protect myself, even from the people who should have protected me. I sent one final message to the family group chat. Please respect my space. Any further intrusion will be handled legally. I am not joking. No one replied. For the first time in my life, I had the final word. In the weeks following the confrontation, I moved into a quiet neighborhood across town, secured by round-the-clock security and completely off the radar of my family. For the first time in my adult life, I woke up each morning without anxiety gnawing at my chest. I was safe, physically, financially, emotionally. With Miss Thornton's guidance, I finalized my financial roadmap. I paid off every cent of my student loans, $68,000, 0 cents, gone with one transaction. I created a solid emergency fund, diversified my investments, and purchased a modest 3-bedroom home. Nothing ostentatious, just warm hardwood floors, a sunny reading nook, and a kitchen I actually enjoyed cooking in. Most importantly, I gave, but on my terms. I donated quietly to a vocational center for disabled children where I once volunteered during college. They sent me a thank you video featuring smiling kids holding up handmade signs. It made me cry, not because they needed me, but because they simply appreciated me. No expectations. Meanwhile, Brooke had started to change. She got a real job, a manager at a local cafe, and stuck with it. One day, I received an email from her. It read, "I'm sorry. I've done a lot of thinking. I know I took things for granted. I'm trying to be better." I didn't reply immediately. Forgiveness, I was learning, took time, but I appreciated the growth. My parents were a different story. Their messages wavered between guilt tripping and backhanded apologies. I didn't respond. I had spent too many years trying to win their affection. Now, I was giving that affection to someone who deserved it, myself. I even enrolled in interior design classes, something I had always been told was impractical. I created a small scholarship under a pseudonym for students in creative fields. I didn't need credit, just purpose. Life wasn't suddenly perfect. I still budgeted. I still used my older phone, but I smiled more. I slept better. I had peace. On the 1-year anniversary of my lottery win, I sat on my back patio, sipping tea as the sunset poured gold across my garden. The wind rustled through trees I'd planted myself. I thought of that check, of the fire, of the laughter that had started my new life. That lottery didn't just change my bank account. It revealed every hidden truth, every fragile bond, every quiet strength I had never given myself credit for. If you're reading this and struggling with toxic family dynamics or being seen only when it's convenient, hear me. You are not selfish for protecting your peace. You are not cruel for saying no. Sometimes the greatest fortune isn't money. It's finally choosing yourself. And I did. I chose me. Since then, I've kept my circle small but meaningful. Rachel remains my closest confidant, and we meet every weekend for hikes, brunches, or spontaneous getaways. We laugh more now, real laughter, not the strained kind I used to force at family dinners. I still hear from extended relatives occasionally, some more supportive than others. My Aunt Helen, bless her, has become a quiet but consistent ally. She never pries, never judges, just listens and reminds me gently that I'm allowed to live life on my own terms. My foundation, originally a small effort, began gaining momentum. We partnered with local colleges and nonprofits to offer free financial literacy programs for young adults. workshops on budgeting, credit, investing, and most importantly, self-worth. I'd spent years learning these lessons the hard way. Now I could offer a head start to others. When people ask how I'm spending my millions, I tell them the truth. I'm spending it on freedom, on choosing where I live, who I surround myself with, what values I invest in. I didn't buy a luxury car, I didn't flaunt designer clothes. I bought silence when I needed to think. I bought distance when I needed to heal. Then I bought time, the most precious currency of all. Do I ever miss my family? Sometimes, but the version I miss never really existed. What I've built instead is something far more real, a life I crafted from ashes and clarity and courage. So if you ever find yourself with a windfall or even just a second chance, don't ask what others expect from you. Ask what you want to create. The answer might surprise you. Mine did, and it led me here to a life no one gave me, but one I gave myself.